Turkey just delivered a crippling blow to Russia. By leveraging its control over the Black Sea and making a bold statement regarding Crimea, Turkey is forcing Putin into a corner. The man who thought invading Ukraine would divide the world and prove his military genius now finds himself outplayed by Erdogan. So what's pushing Erdogan to take such bold steps? And how might this shake up the regional power game? Turkey's moves are turning the tables on Putin faster than he could have predicted, and he's not exactly known for his flexibility these days. But Erdogan's boldness didn't come out of nowhere. It's part of a carefully crafted strategy Putin clearly underestimated. For 2 decades, Erdogan has been steadily tightening his grip on Turkey, embracing a militarized Neo-Ottoman vision for the country. Meanwhile, Putin likely thought he'd found a reliable ally, someone who'd happily buy his discounted oil and gas while the rest of the world shut Russia out. Turkish purchases of Russian energy doubled between 2021 and 2022, and Putin probably assumed Erdogan was in his pocket. Big mistake. If Putin really believed he had Erdogan under control, he's missed the plot entirely. Turkey and Russia have clashed for centuries. Erdogan has been playing both sides in the Ukrainian conflict, but on September 11th, he made his move, declaring Crimea must be returned to Ukraine. Why would Erdogan pull the rug out from under Putin now? Simple. Putin isn't nearly as clever as he thinks. The wannabe Tsar is discovering the hard way that Erdogan's strategy is way more ruthless than he ever anticipated. And what better place to hit Putin where it hurts than Crimea? This isn't just a random patch of land. It's one of the most important pieces of real estate in Eurasia. Any power that controls Crimea controls the Black Sea. Historically, Crimea was ruled by various Turkish polities before the Ottoman Empire took it over from the Crimean Khanate in the mid-15th century. Of course, Peter the Great eventually realized the strategic value of this peninsula 250 years later, recognizing it as Russia's key gateway to a warm water port. For Russia, Crimea wasn't just about trade, it was a matter of security, a staging point that once enabled centuries of brutal slave raids across Eastern Europe. A long series of wars followed Peter the Great's initial attack on the Turks in 1686, ending with Russia's takeover of Crimea in 1783. Still, Russia and Turkey continued to fight one another until World War I. The Ottoman Turks might have lost Crimea, but they still had an interest in preventing Russia from getting too strong in the Black Sea. This interest continued even into the 20th century. Turkey joined NATO in 1952 for this purpose, and to this day, it hosts American nuclear weapons on its soil as a way to check Russia. Turkey's membership and basing arrangements with the U.S. military was the only card NATO had to play in the Cold War, as the Black Sea was otherwise a Soviet lake. Crimea was like a dagger pointed at Turkey from the moment that Russia acquired it. In this regard, the transfer of Crimea to Ukraine in 1954 and its retention as Ukrainian territory following the end of the Soviet Union was an excellent development for Ankara. After 1991, Turkey's historical rival had been left with little influence in the Black Sea, a complete reversal of the situation that prevailed in the Cold War. The Turks also maintained an ethnic interest in Crimea. Russia took the place over, but the majority of its population remained comprised of Crimean Tatars, a Turkish ethnic group, until the mid-19th century. Russia recognized the importance of keeping stable control of Crimea, though, and took coercive measures to ethnically cleanse it of its Tatar population and replace them with Russians. The Crimean Tatars were subject to forced assimilation and deportation. Russia's oppression of this population peaked in 1944, when Joseph Stalin deported all the remaining Tatars to Central Asia. Between 150,000 and 200,000 Crimean Tatars were sent on this journey. Upon arriving at their destinations, they were confined to within a 5-kilometer limit of their imposed places of residence and had to sign a monthly attendance register with the NKVD. In these open-air prisons, they were consigned to work on state-owned farms or factories in return for menial wages. The Tatars were not allowed to return to Crimea until 1988, amidst Gorbachev's perestroika reforms. By 2002, 260,000 had returned out of an estimated 500,000 in ex-Soviet territory. Naturally, the Tatars, which today make up around 12% of Crimea's population, were not happy when Russia unilaterally annexed the peninsula in 2014. Since then, Russia has gone back to some of its old tricks. In March, a United Nations human rights team traveled to Ukraine and sought urgent access to Crimea over alleged mistreatment of the Tatars there, including the death of a well-known activist. Tatar language education has also languished under Russian rule. Pressures have mounted for them to speak Russian instead. With this history, it should not be surprising that Turkey opposed Putin's moves in Crimea from the beginning, although not always as strongly as the West would have liked. In 2015, it condemned Russia's persecution of the Crimean Tatars, but did not go so far as to become part of the sanctions regime imposed in response to Moscow's actions, there or in Ukraine as a whole. Turkey's lack of zeal was a preview of things to come, and it might have been a reason why Putin thought he had a card to play with Erdogan. Meanwhile, Turkey's NATO allies became increasingly frustrated about Ankara's cozy relationship with Moscow. Though the two countries found themselves on opposite sides of the Syrian civil war, they mostly gave each other a wide berth, with the exception of one notorious incident in 2015 when a Turkish F-16 shot down one of Russia's Su-24 fighter jets. According to the Turks, this was because the Russian plane had violated Turkish airspace despite warnings. Putin disputed this claim and insisted the plane was flying over Syria's internationally recognized territory. Another close call came in the Idlib offensive in northern Syria between late 2019 and early 2020, when Syrian government forces surrounded several Turkish observation bases. Turkey launched a counteroffensive, but a meeting between Putin and Erdogan in March resulted in an acceptable ceasefire between them. Despite these rows, Turkey and Russia maintained amicable relations. Turkey has even been a buyer of Russia's S-400 air defense system. The decision resulted in American sanctions and Turkey's exclusion from the F-35 program for fear that the Russians would get important data on the aircraft. Turkey also held up Finland from joining NATO for a year and Sweden from joining for 2 years, amidst its objections regarding those two countries being allegedly friendly to Kurdish factions that the Turks consider to be terrorist groups. This diplomatic impasse was not done in league with Russia, but Putin certainly welcomed it. Again, Turkey was displaying its reputation as increasingly the odd man out of NATO, one that no longer shared the transatlantic alliance's commitment to a liberal world order. Putin and Erdogan share important similarities. Like Putin, Turkey's increasingly authoritarian leader, is reportedly a proponent of the civilization state model of the world. This worldview is a rebuttal to the foundation of modern international relations, which regards each state as being entitled to absolute sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. Instead, the most important components of the civilization state model are ties of culture, religion, ethnicity, and language that can transcend those borders. The state is tasked with defending and preserving those things. Putin invaded Ukraine on these pretexts, as he regards the modern norm of international relations as being a Western imposition coming out of the treaties of Westphalia and Versailles. Putin repeatedly stressed these ideas in the build-up to his invasion of Ukraine, when he called the end of the Soviet Union the end of historical Russia, an outcome which separated millions of ethnic Russians from the motherland. He also repeated his accusations that began in 2014, claiming that neo-Nazi elements in Ukraine had taken over the government and were oppressing ethnic Russians and Russian-speaking people, with the West's backing. In his 2021 essay entitled On the Historical Unity of Russians and Ukrainians, Putin further elaborated about his civilization-centered worldview, when he claimed that Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus had historically been one nation and one people, united under the Russian Empire and Soviet Union, and then torn apart, now separated by these Western impositions of international relations. Toward the end of the essay, Putin was more transparent with his ideas about what world order should look like. He mentioned that though Western countries had demarcated borders, they were close to one another and shared ties of culture and language, with people frequently crossing between their territories and feeling at home because of those similarities. He gave the examples of the United States and Canada, as well as Germany and Austria. He said the same was true for Ukrainians, who now live in Russia. Rather than being separate, he said, "We see them as our own close people." Putin also said that the entire concept of Ukrainian statehood, should it follow the West's model, is based on the idea of being anti-Russian. He vowed that he would never allow Russia's historical territories and people to be used against Russia. He concluded, I am confident that true sovereignty of Ukraine is possible only in partnership with Russia. Our spiritual, human, and civilizational ties formed for centuries and have their origins in the same sources. They have been hardened by common trials, achievements, and victories. Our kinship has been transmitted from generation to generation. It is in the hearts and memories of people living in modern Russia and Ukraine, in the blood ties that unite millions of our families. Together we have always been and will be many times stronger and more successful, for we are one people. Both Eastern and Western historians criticize Putin's essay as an ahistorical piece of propaganda, but it reveals a lot about his notions of international relations. His essay is therefore important not only with regards to the invasion of Ukraine, but his relations with foreign leaders. This supposed civilization view of the world is one of the reasons why Putin's relationship with China's Xi Jinping is reportedly close. Xi also views the world through these ideas, which is part of why he has been so militarily active around Taiwan and even expanded into the South China Sea. One of the justifications his government gives for the fortification of islands in the area is that these waters have been historically Chinese. In 2015, Xi himself claimed that the islands had been Chinese territory since ancient times. The following year, an international court ruled against China's territorial claims and its 9-line map. But Beijing ignored the ruling. It simply did not view the world in the same way. The idea that an international court in The Hague could tell China what to do in its own supposed historical territory was, to Xi and his subordinates, yet another Western imposition on questions that are Chinese in character. These notions of international law are important with regards to contemporary relations between Russia and Turkey. The post-Ottoman Republic of Turkey was founded on the model of being a modern Western-style nation-state. Westernization was one of Mustafa Kemal Ataturk's highest priorities. However, Turkey has gradually gone on a different course under Erdogan. The most symbolic change arguably came in 2020, when he converted Hagia Sophia into a mosque. Ataturk had transformed the building from a mosque into a non-religious museum in 1935 as a marker of his efforts to modernize the country through secular reforms. Erdogan decided to take the opposite course, despite international objections. The decision was meant to appeal to Erdogan's base of conservative Muslim supporters in Turkey. Crucially, it was also designed to appeal to devout Muslims beyond Turkey's borders, who had long called for Hagia Sophia to be made into a mosque again. Western leaders objected to the conversion, but the Turks considered this an imposition. During the past decade, as Erdogan continues to entrench himself in power, Turkey has become much more militarily active. Once a great power with a far-flung military reach, Ataturk presided over a Turkish strategic retreat under his peace at home, peace in the world foreign policy. To this day, the Turkish government claims that it seeks to maintain this policy. Even during World War II, Turkey remained neutral until the closing months. Turkey's entrance into NATO slightly shifted this foreign policy, but since Soviet Russia now had near-hegemonic power in the Black Sea, Ankara was left with little choice. Intervention in the Cyprus dispute in 1974 marked the beginning of a more active Turkish foreign policy. Turkey's long war with the Kurdistan Workers' Party also helped to gradually bring it out of strategic retreat, but Erdogan accelerated it. Turkey is no longer a passive player. It's conducted major combat operations in Iraq and Syria, and has built military relationships with countries as far afield as Libya, Pakistan, Somalia, and as we will soon see, Eastern Europe. Its military footprint includes most of the lands formerly within the Ottoman Empire. Erdogan has also repeatedly questioned the 1923 Treaty of Lausanne, which sets Turkey's internationally recognized borders. He claims that Ataturk was forced to make these concessions under unequal terms, and that Turkey has the right to demand a return to an earlier territorial plan set out by the Ottoman legislature in 1920. These territories included Cyprus, parts of northern Syria and Iraq, all of Armenia, parts of Georgia and Iran, and the Aegean Islands, stretching west to parts of mainland Greece. Mapmakers in Turkey have begun to be more aggressive with their territorial claims, including parts of Armenia and Syria within Turkish borders. It's a tactic they might have learned from their Chinese counterparts, who are conducting similar salami-slicing operations to assert claims to territory beyond their internationally recognized borders, using these maps as part of their information warfare efforts. Turkey's increasingly active foreign policy under Erdogan has led to accusations that it now has Neo-Ottoman ambitions. While some Western experts have focused on growing authoritarianism within Turkey's borders, others, such as those at the Middle East Institute, warn that this is too narrow a viewpoint to understand its true objectives. One of them is in the promotion of a pan-Islamist political movement. There is a historical bias for this policy. The Ottoman sultans claimed that they were the legitimate caliphs, the successors of the Prophet Muhammad and rulers of all members of the Muslim community. The title combines secular and religious functions. Erdogan has not gone that far, but his government has positioned itself as the defender and promoter of Islam. The return of Hagia Sophia to mosque status was designed with this in mind. Turkey has financed the construction of mosques all over the world, with Erdogan himself participating in many of the opening ceremonies. Putin has been watching Erdogan's moves and might have seen something of a kindred spirit. Someone who rejects Western standards of international norms and seeks to remake the world's order on ideological lines suitable for him. However, he should have done a history homework. Erdogan might be tilting away from the West, but that does not mean he is a reliable partner for Russia to work with. Crimea had been Ottoman territory until 1783, after all. Along with demanding the rights of Crimean Tatars be protected, Turkey did not recognize any Russian right to Crimea. In 2016, Erdogan told his then Ukrainian counterpart, Petro Poroshenko, that Russia was illegally occupying the peninsula. He reiterated this stance following the invasion, when he said that international law demanded that Russia return Crimea to Ukraine. Turkey also forged a strong military partnership with Ukraine in the years before the war. Turkey has been a provider of large amounts of military equipment to Ukraine, most notably its Bayraktar TB2 drone, which is only the most famous example. In 2021, a classified memo was leaked. Its content detailed the long-running relationship between the Turkish and Ukrainian militaries. Part of this relationship included secret cross-training between the Ukrainians and Turkey's elite Special Forces Command. The relationship dated to at least April 2016. From that time, Turkey's special operations advisors trained Ukrainian troops in missions ranging from counter-terrorism, surveillance, cross-border incursions, and sabotage. This training has come in handy as Ukrainian special operations teams have conducted or assisted in such missions behind the lines and into Russian territory. Crimea has been a particular target of these operations. When the war started, Turkey lent important diplomatic aid to Ukraine. It condemned the invasion in Resolution ES 11-1 of the United Nations General Assembly. More importantly, it invoked the wartime provisions in the 1936 Montreux Convention regarding the regime of the Straits. By officially recognizing Putin's so-called special military operation as a war, the Turks closed off the Dardanelles and Bosporus to ships from the Russian Navy, permitting only certain recognized ships in the Black Sea Fleet to return to their base, as specified in Article 19. Russia had hoped to use its closer relationship with Turkey to avoid this. 3 days after the invasion began, Turkey exercised these powers. As a result, the Russian Black Sea Fleet cannot be reinforced. Russia was therefore obligated to be cautious about how it used the vessels it had available in the theater and limited its offensive potential. Ukraine subsequently destroyed or heavily damaged many of these vessels, forcing them to retreat. In September 2024, Erdogan reiterated its intention to see Crimea return to Ukraine. Our support for Ukraine's territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence is unwavering. The return of Crimea to Ukraine is a requirement of international law. He also reiterated his support for the Crimean Tatar community, insisting it was a top foreign policy priority for Turkey. His conditions for the end of the war were a peace based on the independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Ukraine. Erdogan might not be as respectful of those notions elsewhere, but when it comes to the Black Sea, his country's interests remain keeping Russia from becoming too powerful. Supporting Ukraine is the best way for him to do that. Turkey has cleverly played both sides of the conflict. It's bought Russian energy for bargain prices while continuing its traditional foreign policy of counteracting Russia in the Black Sea. Turkey must also champion the Crimean Tatars if it wants to be taken seriously as the leading power for the Muslim faith. Putin might have seen a fellow autocrat, but autocrats typically aren't bound by deep friendship or ideological ties. They will tend to do what's best for them. Having Crimea remain a Russian outpost in the Black Sea is not best for Turkey. If anything, Erdogan might secretly want it back for himself. What do you think will happen next in the dance between Turkey and Russia? Is Erdogan's recent insistence that Crimea be returned to Ukraine part of his strategy to drive a harder bargain and get Russian energy for even cheaper prices? Or is he saying this out of a true commitment to Ukraine's sovereign rights under the status quo approach to international relations? Don't forget to let us know in the comments. Also, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more analysis from the commander.